Hey, Geoff, you've been travelling all over the place, helping people implement Safewards. What can you tell us about the implementation process?
The implementation process. Well, I think first of all, people are very keen to implement Safewards. There's been a lot of big interest in kind of taking it onto the wards and actually making it happen, which is very gratifying. Obviously, when you do something like this, that's exactly the kind of response you want people to have. And a few places have kind of asked me to come down and both do a presentation and then help them think through how do they start to implement it. And I'm talking here about the wards themselves. I think organisations have different things they need to think about. How can they get it rolling out across wards? How can they secure the equipment? How do they get the buy-in? But what I'm really talking about here is the individual wards themselves. So this is kind of talking to ward managers or nurse consultants who are looking to try and help individual staff teams to think through implementation. And that's, I think, where it gets very interesting. And of course, that's where we want the effect to happen, is within those individual teams and those individual areas. So the way, I think first of all to say is that on the website there's the implementation guide, which is in effect very, very good. But what's quite clear is that people go to implementation, and I think, if I'm being very honest, I don't really think they look at the implementation guide that securely. They kind of read the first bits, but they don't go to things like the checklist and stuff. So there's a lot of kind of over the processes reminding people that really that's a process, and that while people are keen and enthusiastic and eager and they want to jump in there, it is worthwhile just taking a quiet step back and saying, okay, let's plan this properly, let's get this done as well as we can from the off, because the reality of wards is they're very busy places, and what people really don't like is kind of stop, start, and half starting and then being delayed. So it is worth, the team that's implementing it is to just take a step back and decide how to plan it. And in that planning process, I think there are some things that do seem to be very useful. I think the first thing to think about is, what's the ward already doing? Wards are not these kind of little boxes that have had nothing going on forever. There's been an awful lot happening out there. There's been productive wards, there's been star wards, there's been individual local projects, either run by staff on the team or service user groups. There's all that kind of stuff. So I think it is worthwhile sitting and saying, from all that process, if we've had it going on, what's on the ward? And in many ways, when they look at safe wards, is there some stuff that's kind of, perhaps there in some way already? Is there something going on? Are there service user group meetings happening? And then not to think, oh, we've already got that, but to look at safe wards and saying, we do need to kind of make sure that we're not assuming that the safe ward intervention is encapsulated in that. There might be a small adaptation, but that's a kind of good place to start thinking about implementing safe wards. Because the one thing that wards look at is they look at 10 interventions, and they think of it like a big elephant. How do we bring all these 10 interventions onto the ward? And of course, the way you eat an elephant is one bite at a time. So in the implementation phase, if you're doing your planning, it's good to start thinking about where are we going to start. I think it's fair to say in the trial that our kind of 8-week period of implementing all the interventions was fine for the research, and it was very necessary for the research. And I'm not criticising the research because it was excellent. But in terms of implementation, in terms of wards that can take their time and plan this through carefully, 8 weeks is not a good time frame. They need to set their own time frames, and they need to be realistic about that. But if you're going to eat the elephant one bite at a time, you really need to decide which of the 10 bites you're going to take, whether you're going to take 2 bites at a time to do 2 interventions. And I think in making the decision about which bite to go for, there is another kind of process that people go through, and that is thinking, what have we already got, as I've already said. But then, if kind of from that there isn't much, or it still needs adaptation, there are other questions that are good to ask. What intervention are people most enthusiastic about? Which one really grabs them and they say, God, I'd love to do that? And particularly people like the ward manager, if they're looking at something and going, that is wonderful, my staff are going to love that. Then, think about, okay, do you want to do that? That's a fantastic motivator. If you think the calm down box, for example, is going to be just perfect on your ward and you can really sell it to your staff, why don't you take safe wards and say, we're going to start with this one, which people are going to get enthused about. If you think it's know each other, if you've already got groups, you think mutual help meetings, go for what you feel is the kind of, and I hate the phrase quick win, but that's what you know, the kind of the motivator, enthusiastic one. And there's other ways you can ask that question. Which one is going to get the service users most involved quickest? Discharge tree, for example, painting that on the wall. So you can say, do we want to go for what's going to enthuse the staff most? Do we want to get the one that's going to signal to the service users that we're doing something different? You might think, which one do you consider to be simply the easiest? Which one's the quickest to get up? So you want to ask those questions and come up with, you know, different people take it in different ways, but I wouldn't go for this is the hardest, this is the one that people are going to resist most. I wouldn't go for that as your start. But in that process, you will start to identify ones that perhaps you think are going to be hardest to implement if you're a specialist service that fit in less with your service. So I kind of allow people to get involved with Safewards, get used to the model, get used to doing a few interventions, and then bring them in later when people are a bit more kind of in the swing of things, because there'll be less resistance and people will be more likely to problem solve how to put that into place. Then I think once you've got to that process, you're in your little kind of leadership team and you've got your ideas going and you're kind of choosing one or two, you've got to take it out to the staff team. You've got to. And I think you've got to take it out in that processed way. Here's Safewards, here's the model, and here's the couple we're going to start with from our idea. Understanding that, you know, you're obviously opening up to negotiation and debate. Different areas have done that in slightly different ways. What seems to be effective is people like Sean Williams in Wales runs sessions for the staff where they kind of seem to problem solve and make those decisions. In Bluebell in Reading, they had a huge kind of away day for the staff where they did the presentation, did a workshop, and they kind of did all that process. But I do think it involves getting the staff together somehow, at least as many of them as you can. And then you decide through that kind of process of discussion and perhaps looking at those questions with people and sharing your thoughts, you get firm down to the first couple of interventions that you're going to start. Then I think it's important as well that not to assume then that everybody's up to speed. So you'll have staff that aren't there. And that's where you go back to your implementation guide and you look at your checklist, because the biggest single piece of advice I think on that checklist is we have these instruction videos for each of the 10 interventions, and they are incredibly important because the work is done there for a ward to be able to make sure that all the staff, and that includes the MDT as well, have the same piece of information about each of the interventions. So send out an email to all of your staff saying the process, summarising everything I've just said in very simple terms, and then say, watch this instruction video because this is the intervention or interventions we're going to start with. We're going to be selecting champions, or say if you've already selected the champion, but we're going to start on this date. So while you're on the board, take 5 or 6 minutes out of your time, log into the website, look at this instruction video, and at that point, when you get to the start date, the assumption should be that all of your staff know what it's about. And then, to be honest, you start. You start the process, you get your first few, you've got your time frame, and then you've got a process of bringing the others on, all the time looking at perhaps the ones at the end that are going to take the longest. There are some clear signals, I think. Things like clear mutual expectation is a process of negotiation with the patients. That might take a bit of time. You've got printing. So those things may take time. And just be kind of sympathetic to yourselves. Take it easy. Don't worry if things slip a little bit. Just have your project plan. Keep going. It is worthwhile sometimes to have somebody external come in just to give you some support and check out that things are okay. But it's not essential. A ward manager can do all that. And that in that long-winded kind of description, it's like the other thing is like, these are all suggestions. Make it your own. This is your ward. This is where you work. This is where you look after your patients. It's totally your area. We want Safewards to be there for you, to help you to do that. We think it does, and the feedback we have from people is that it does. Getting all 10 interventions up takes time, but that journey is just as important. You know, enjoy it, have fun, and feel the benefit of your staff and your patients doing something that is very, very worthwhile. Does that answer your question?
It does, very comprehensively, Geoff. But I know what everybody watching this video is going to be thinking is, what is all of that stuff which is behind Geoff? And they, of course, won't have had the great privilege of seeing the desk of Geoff on a regular basis. Now, I'm not going to show them all the messy bit, but I thought you might like to point people to a few highlights on the wall behind you.
Okay. Let's start with this down here. This is from talking to acutely psychotic people. That's a diagram which summarises an incredibly complex piece of research which you led, but I assisted you with. So yeah, that's my... I work in pictures, so that's my picture diagram of what's a very, very interesting kind of piece. This is one person going through, one poor person who has the tremendous misfortune to go from psychotic depression all the way up to psychotic mania, going through anxiety, normal mood, hypomania. So it's kind of, if you like, a diagram of kind of mood swings, just to, you get those diagrams with the kind of oscillating thing, which is this kind of thing, and I just wanted to kind of visualise it as people. This one, I think, this one's one I'm really proud of, simply because it's negative symptoms, but negative symptoms are awful. I mean, they crush people, and so, but they're often described in quite bland terms because they're negative, because they're about reduction. But I think that they are quite powerful and horrible. So they crush human beings, our poor patients. And these flashy words, which are just awful, are actually quite simple concepts. So I've drawn pictures to kind of describe them. This is thought disorder.
This is my favourite one, I think.
Is it? Okay. Well, there's 18 variations of thought disorder, and I've split them up into four kind of aspects, which is speed, flow, focus, and structure. I won't go into it, but that's, pressure speech, but also alogia, slow speech. This is kind of block thought. This is just all that tangential stuff where people are derailing and going off on tangents, and this is kind of where the whole structure of communication is disrupted, so that you can't actually understand what people are saying when they arise at your listening post. It's all kind of broken up. So yeah, it's a selection, and this is you. That's you, Len.
Oh, thank you so much, Geoff.
I'm preparing that for a poster about a course to do about talking with acutely psychotic people. But there's another thing, actually, to go back to Safewards, and this is the UK. It's crude. It's not scientific. But it's just all the dots represent a ward or a group of wards who are implementing Safewards. So I take great pleasure in sticking a blue dot on that, and I'll be sticking one in South Yorkshire soon, following an email. Just once I find out where in South Yorkshire. And I'm sure it's not everybody, but it's what we know of.
Okay, thanks very much. That was most